All right. Welcome to CHI's Unlearning Our Loneliness. We are in week 5, the Perils section. A little bit of review. This week we discussed Milan Kundera's The Hitchhiking Game, which revealed how ambivalence can be traced to the fact that our identities frequently are no more than fictions. We have no absolute identity, and our need to have that certainty with a partner can lead to conflicts. Additionally, we discussed how our identities relate to how we navigate feelings about our bodies as well as the language we use. As our identities change, we may find that any alterations are met with ambivalence from a partner who likes and does not like who we are and who we become. To unlearn our loneliness requires knowing the paradoxes that constitute our identity. Sound familiar from last week? Okay. This week, we'll examine Chekhov's Lady with the Dog in order to understand the perils of self-deception. Self-deception has the advantage of allowing us to act in the world, but this advantage comes at the cost of knowing who we are and the causes of our loneliness. Put simply, this story will help us to understand how our loneliness may remain a constant so long as we remain ignorant of our own motivations concerning how we relate, especially at an intimate level, with others. So, here we go. Page 68, the narrator starts out with the familiar world, the everyday world of gossip, neutrally presenting a fact. Quote, "It was said that a new person had appeared on the seafront, a lady with a little dog." The narrator then presents the protagonist Gurov, who is fairly at home at Yalta, and who had, quote, begun to take an interest in new arrivals. This interest is presented as another fact, although the motivation behind this fact is left unsaid. He had begun to take an interest in new arrivals, as though it just occurred out of nowhere. The bracketed "to have sex with" is just kind of left in the margins of the story. Chekhov's doing a lot of that throughout the story. This first meeting is repeated. Quote, "And afterwards he met her in the public gardens and in the square several times a day. She was walking alone, always wearing the same beret and always with the same white dog. No one knew who she was, and everyone called her simply, quote, the lady with the dog." End quote. So that's our introduction. Page 69, Gurov reflects, quote, "If she is here alone without a husband or friends, it wouldn't be a bad idea to make her acquaintance." Again, no indication about what might prompt this thought is mentioned. It is only at this time that the narrator presents us with information about Gurov. Number one, he's under 40, but he has 3 kids, one almost 12, and that's because he married young. Number two, he has a very ambivalent relationship with his wife. First, A, whichever you want to go. A, we'll say, she seems closer to 60 than to 40, at least in his reckoning. B, she was, quote, a tall, erect woman with dark eyebrows, staid and dignified, and, as she said of herself, an intellectual. She read a great deal. C, Gurov, quote, secretly considered her unintelligent, narrow, inelegant, was afraid of her, and did not like to be at home. All in a jumble. The fact that his considerations are kept secret likely has to do with the fact that he is afraid of her. The nature of the fear may arise from the fact that he's intimidated by somebody who's staid, dignified, and who reads and speaks well, which he does not. D, he's unfaithful to her, which to him justifies his misogyny. It's as though he thinks that the fact that he gets away with cheating means, quote, she's not so smart. The fact that they're a lower race means that he needs to feel no guilt about what he does. The lower race, in case you didn't catch it, is in quotes. That's his words, not mine. That's not what I think about women. All right. Number 3, he's ambivalent concerning women in general. A, on the one hand, bitter experience has shown him the truth of the lower race. B, on the other hand, he cannot go for more than 2 days without women. C, men make Gurov bored, cold, and uncommunicative. He cannot be himself among them. D, women allow him to know what to say and how to behave. E, quote, in his appearance, in his character, in his whole nature, there is something attractive and elusive which allured women and disposed them in his favor. He knew that, and some force seemed to draw him to them. End quote. The whole paragraph here depicts the weak psychology underlying Gurov's affairs. He isn't as interested in his men, he only feels himself around women, and most tellingly, there's a strange and inchoate attraction that he's helpless to fight against. He's destined to meet the other women, even though he knows better. Number 4. His affairs follow a predictable pattern. It starts great, becomes unbearable, and then someone new helps him to forget everything that he learned last time. So, quote, experience often repeated, truly bitter experience, had taught him long ago that with decent people, every intimacy which at first so agreeably diversifies life and appears a light and charming adventure, inevitably grows into a regular problem of extreme intricacy, and in the long run the situation becomes unbearable. But at every fresh meeting with an interesting woman, this experience seemed to slip out of his memory, and he was eager for life, and everything seemed simple and amusing. Wash, rinse, repeat. That's the cycle. So, the narrator then offers Gurov's interpretation of the lady with the dog. Based on her expression, gait, and hairstyle, he figured that she was married, alone, and bored, at Yalta for the first time. There's then a series of ellipses as though a thought comes, unbidden and irrelevant. Quote, the stories of the immorality in such places as Yalta are to a great extent untrue. He despised them and knew that such stories were for the most part made up by persons who would themselves have been glad to sin if they had been able. But when the lady sat down at the next table 3 paces from him, he remembered these tales of easy conquests, of trips to the mountains, and the tempting thought of a swift, fleeting love affair, a romance with an unknown woman whose name he did not know, suddenly took possession of him. Essentially, Yalta seems to be like Florida during spring break week. On the one hand, the accounts of immorality there are likely inflated, both by those who fear and by those who desire such romantic interludes. On the other hand, everyone who goes to Yalta or to Florida for spring break are aware of the stories. The seeming break in his consciousness, in fact, continues the train of thought concerning his interpretation of the lady, that she's bored, alone, and married, and in Yalta. The thought of a swift, fleeting love affair only seems to have suddenly taken possession of him. In fact, he has carefully curated a path toward this thought from the very first mention of the lady with the dog. Its suddenness is important only because it allows him to feel helpless against an irresistible tide that he himself has generated. Right? So the whole time when he's thinking about the lady, like, oh, it'd be good to make her acquaintance. If she's not here with her husband and doesn't have any friends, oh, it's this mysterious lady that everybody's talking about. I'm looking for somebody who's young, and full of life that makes me feel excited again. Oh, we're in Yalta. You know what they say about Yalta. That never happens. Whoa, but wouldn't it be great if it did happen? Here, with her. And then there's this sudden, magical exclamation point, voila. And suddenly, Gurov is infatuated. But he's helpless against it, right? Because this is creation ex nihilo from his own perspective, right? That thought springs unbidden out of absolutely nowhere. He had no idea that the thought was coming. He missed the total setup. Do you see where self-deception emerges? Does that make sense? Right? He ignores the whole path, the whole trajectory of his thinking in order to arrive at the conclusion as sudden, even though it actually follows fairly seamlessly from his initial starting point, which is he wants to have an affair, and that's why he's in Yalta. Does that make sense? Okay. Page 70. They have a brief conversation about dullness, discussing how trendy it is to complain of boredom while one relaxes. Sound familiar? Oh, how boring it is to be here. I don't do those kinds of things often. I don't like being bored. They ate dinner like strangers, a simile that produces an ambiguous tension. After all, they are strangers. So saying that they're like strangers implies that somehow they're not. They have the, quote, light, jesting talk of people free and contented, for whom it is all the same where they go or what they talk about. The conversation of an elite upper class. They discuss the weather and give facts about themselves. Gurov presents himself as wealthy and cultured. He's really a philologist, although he works in the bank. He's trained for opera and he has 2 houses. He's the next bachelor, except He's not. He learns that her name is Anna and that she can't remember what her husband does. There you go. It becomes somewhat apparent that she's not all that into her husband. The next paragraph allows another moment of self-deception, one that deprives him of agency over his own life given the forces of fate. Quote, back in his own room, he thought about her and felt sure that he would meet her the next day. It was inevitable. End quote. Parentheses that aren't spoken by Chekhov. Inevitable because Gurov will make sure that he puts himself in her way. End parentheses, right? I mean, of course it's inevitable because he wants to meet her and it's not that big of a place. They will meet. But by positing it as the inevitable, it makes it fated and thus something he's helpless against once again. He then thinks of her in terms of his daughter, framing Anna as naive and innocent. Quote, this must have been the first time in her life that she had been alone in surroundings in which men could follow her and watch her and speak to her, all the time with this secret aim she could not fail to divine. Some big secret there, Gurov, right? You know, it's the secret aim that the women don't know, but they do, but they don't because they're innocent, but they do, but they don't, right? And he can just flip back and forth between the fact that she knows, the fact that she's innocent and doesn't, she knows, she doesn't, makes it really easy for him to deceive himself. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. The secret aim, of course, is not so secret. It's sexual desire. It's secret only to those who, like Gurov, remain unaware of their own motives, which Gurov is. Gurov's final thought involves, quote, her slender, delicate neck, her lovely gray eyes. There's something pathetic about her anyway, he thought, and fell asleep. This ensures that he's able to belittle his thoughts and feelings about her, returning her to the general status of the lower race. There's something pathetic there. Page 71, chapter 2. Anna and Gurov are hanging out at the pier a week into their relationship. Gurov asks what they should do. Anna made no reply, and so Gurov, quote, looked at her intensely and all at once put his arm around her and kissed her on the lips and breathed in the moisture and the fragrance of the flowers, and he immediately looked around him, anxiously wondering whether anyone had seen them. Let's go to your hotel, he said softly, and they both walked quickly. Right? Oh no, they might see us kissing. Let's go to your hotel room where these kisses will be anonymous. Kisses and nothing more, one is sure. Once in her room, Gurov reflects on the kinds of women he'd had relationships with. There have been 3. 1, carefree, good-natured women who are excited by his lovemaking and are grateful to him for their short-lived happiness. I'm sure that that list is long and illustrious. Number 2, women like his wife, whose, quote, caresses were insincere, affected, hysterical, mixed up with a great deal of quite unnecessary talk, and who thought of sex as more significant than passion or lovemaking. You know, he just wants the sex, the passion. They want significance. They want it to mean something. It's insincere, it's affected, it's hysterical. He doesn't want that. Number 3, beautiful, cold women whose features flitted a predatory expression, betraying a determination to wring from life more than it could give. Women no longer in their first youth, capricious, irrational, despotic, brainless. Once Gurov had cooled, these women's beauty arose in him nothing but revulsion, and the lace trimming on their underclothes reminded him of fish scales. In some ways, though, like the predatory determination to wring from life more than it gives, no longer in the first youth, capricious, sounds a lot like Gurov, right? Maybe not with the fish scales on, but Gurov-esque nonetheless, right? Yeah, exactly.
And later in the story, there's some subtle references to fish generally being prepared in a way that is a little bit less than perfect. They make this comparison between the women he has affairs with and fish.
They're the like grade B meat, you know, not Yalta quality, but if they're there, he'll take them. He won't throw them back into the water. Not Gurov. Sorry about that. Overall, Gurov seems happy with women who are grateful and to despise those women most like him, the predatory ones who want to wring more out of life. The sex scene in which they consummate, he and Anna, is wholly excised from the text, which instead immediately jumps to Anna's reaction. So somewhere in between the lines, they have sex. Here's what Chekhov writes. Anna seemed to regard the affair as something very special, very serious, as if she had become a fallen woman, an attitude he found odd and disconcerting. Her features lengthened and drooped. She assumed a pose of dismal meditation, like a repentant sinner in some classical painting. "It isn't right," she said. "You will never respect me anymore." Right? So they have sex, and then Anna, very dutifully, is sad and penitent. "What kind of person am I? Gurov, what have you done to me? I was once innocent, no longer, alas." Bad faith, right? She's assuming a pose that seems manufactured to the narrator, thus like the classical painting, right? It's a show. It's how she knows she ought to react. It's not necessarily a native emotion. It's just what one is supposed to do when one's in Yalta, right? This is how she's supposed to behave. So the emotions might be genuine, maybe, and we don't know Anna that well at this point, but the narrator clearly depicts what is performed. She becomes the fallen woman, complete with the assumed pose, and Gurov's reaction to her performance is revealing of his character. And this is my favorite line in the whole story. So Anna says, "You'll never respect me anymore." The next thing the narrator says is this, quote, "On the table was a watermelon. Gurov cut himself a slice from it and began slowly eating it. At least half an hour passed in silence. 'Why should I stop respecting you?' asked Gurov. 'You don't know what you're saying.'" So she assumes the pose, says, "You'll never respect me." He takes half an hour to eat a slice of watermelon, and then just throws out, "Why should I stop respecting you?" It's brilliant. That's Gurov, right? "Oh yeah, you're worried about stuff. Let me eat this watermelon." "Ah, watermelon. Oh yeah, you're worried? Forget it. It's fine. This is Yalta. These things happen." It's clear that it'd be difficult for Gurov to stop respecting her, as he hasn't shown himself capable of offering much respect in the first place, right? Anna's response shows a bit of honesty, just enough, though, to fall back into an even deeper mess of self-deception. So here's her response to Gurov's comment, quote, "How can I justify myself? I'm a wicked, fallen woman. I despise myself and have not the least thought of self-justification. It isn't my husband I have deceived, it's myself. And not only now, I've been deceiving myself for ever so long. My husband is no doubt an honest, worthy man, but he's a flunky. And now I've become an ordinary, worthless woman, and everyone has the right to despise me." All right, do you see how she just pinballs all over the place? Like, and she works in there that she's lying to herself. But that which she says she's lying to herself about is the quality and integrity of her husband. That which she's actually lying to herself about is the fact that she feels bad about any of this. So, one, as we discussed last week, it's easy to assume the roles painted out in literature and other fictions instead of asking ourselves how we really feel. Right? We learned that in the hitchhiking game. In this case, her stance as a wicked fallen woman, or even as an ordinary worthless woman, these are performed stances. They're not necessarily true. Number two, she'll admit that she's deceived herself, but this deceit concerns the quality of her husband, not herself. Admitting a shallow level of self-deceit protects her from delving further into the meaning of her actions, right? And so if I know that I'm behaving in self-deception, like this much, and this is the file folder of self-deception, then I'll just take out this much for husband. And I won't worry about this. I'll just be like, "Oh, yep, there's that self-deception. There it is. I'm lying about who my husband is," and just ignore all this. It's really clever, right? I'm worried that I might be involved in self-deception. So I'll just take this little slice and ignore the rest of the loaf. Do you see that? Does it make sense? Okay. All right. Page 73. The narrator makes clear that there's something a bit less than genuine about Anna's reaction by discussing Gurov, who clearly doesn't buy any of it. I mean, again, he's not the most sensitive fellow, but he's really not buying it. Quote, "Gurov listened to her, bored to death. The naive accents, the remorse, All was so unexpected, so out of place. But for the tears in her eyes, she might have been jesting or play acting, right? But he knows what he's supposed to do, so, quote, he gazed into her fixed, terrified eyes, kissed her, and soothed her with gentle, affectionate words, and gradually she calmed down and regained her cheerfulness. Soon they were laughing together again, end quote. And from there, they seem to continue on together. Gurov has a fascinating moment of false insight as he sits with Anna, quote, enchanted by the sight of all this magical beauty. And he thinks, quote, when you come to think of it, everything in the world is beautiful, really, but our own thoughts and actions when we lose sight of the higher aims of life and of our dignity of human beings. I mean, that sounds like a Starbucks coffee cup, right? Like one of those insight things. Like, I mean, it's just perfect. It's beautiful, pithy, wise, in that special sort of way. So yeah, it's a nifty thought, but it seems divorced from anything that Gurov would actually consider living by. His interests seem far from the dignity of human beings, especially the ones that he's seducing, or from the higher aims of life that would involve other than having sex with women. These thoughts allow him to believe that he's the kind of person who cares about these things, though, however divorced they are from him in practice. Right? He's like, I listen to NPR. I'll vote for Bernie Sanders. It's fine. I'm that kind of guy. No, let me just chill out in Yalta for a while. As long as I listen to NPR, it's fine. I'm the kind of person I want to be. It'll be okay. I even pledged this week, right? Totally on board. Make sense? Page 74. The relationship continues as they continue to meet. Quote, the utter idleness, those kisses in broad daylight, accompanied by furtive glances and the fear of discovery, the heat, the smell of the sea, and the idle, smart, well-fed people continually crossing their field of vision seemed to have given him a new lease on life. He told Anna she was beautiful and seductive, while she was always pensive, always trying to force from him the admission that he did not respect her, that he did not love her a bit, and considered her just an ordinary woman. Right? So he's telling her, oh yeah, Anna, you're beautiful. Woo, you're seductive. You're always pensive, right? And she's thinking, she's like, no, you really don't like me. You really don't respect me. Oh, but you're way up here. No, I'm way down here. And there's their relationship. Truth is, like, she's kind of banal and ordinary, and he's kind of banal and ordinary. But as long as he pitches it up here and she pitches it down there, then they have some tension in their relationship. And it makes it more than about the sex, right? It's this big existential drama. The relationship, in other words, consists of each letting the other person believe what they wish to believe about themselves. Which in some ways is the formula for a great relationship. It's also the formula for a great affair, or any great lie or hoax that you don't want to have much integrity associated with. Gurov never disabuses Anna of her self-doubt, and Anna never interrupts his new lease on life. Right? How very kind of you to give that to each other. They're little gifts. Eventually, however, Anna's husband sends for her and she prepares to go. It's a good thing I'm going, she said to Gurov. It's the intervention of fate. End quote. Fate here is another term for self-deception. It's a way that she can justify her actions by relinquishing all responsibility for their coming to a conclusion. It must be fate that we're being separated. Nothing else could separate us, because clearly it's a match made in heaven otherwise. Any questions so far?
The fate of her choosing to return home.
Yeah. Oh, I've been summoned. See you, Gurov. It's been real. You know, summer love. You can be John Travolta, I guess. I don't know.
But in Yalta.
But in Yalta, John Travolta Yalta, something like that. 75. Gurov's thoughts about the end of the affair continue along the train of self-deception. Rather than looking to fate, however, Gurov rehearses well-practiced stories. Quote, he had only just waked up, and he told himself that this had just been one more of the many adventures in his life, and that it too was over, leaving nothing but a memory. He was moved and sad, and felt a slight remorse. The reason for the remorse allows him to justify his letting her leave without actually caring. Quote, after all, this young woman, whom he would never see again, had not actually really been happy with him. He had been friendly, but in his whole behavior, in the tones of his voice, in his very caresses, there had been a shade of irony, the insulting indulgence of the fortunate male, which is a great line. In other words, he, in retrospect, realizes he is playing the role of the fortunate male to her fallen woman. Role play. Quote, she had insisted in calling him good. He had appeared to her different from his real self. In a word, he had involuntarily deceived her, end quote. In allowing his deception to come to the surface after the fact, and allowing it to be nothing that he could claim responsibility over, Gurov ensures that he has nothing to feel badly about, and that the pattern would be able to recommence. Right? Oh, that was just specific to this time. I mean, the next person I'm sure will be totally sincere, right? This Anna, she just didn't get the sincerity, but it's here. It just wasn't there. That's her fault, not my fault. I'm good. Chapter 3, back in Moscow. Gurov rejoins Moscow life, reading 3 papers, going out to eat, playing cards. He assumed that, quote, in a month's time, Anna would be nothing more but a wistful memory, end quote, but instead finds that she, quote, did not come to him in his dreams. She accompanied him everywhere, like his shadow, end quote. He persists in his self-deception by idealizing the past. Quote, page 76, when he closed his eyes, she seemed to stand before him, still lovelier, younger, tenderer than she had really been. He saw himself, too, as better than he had been in Yalta. In the evenings, he could hear her breathing, the sweet rustle of her skirts. In the streets, he followed women with his eyes to see if any were like her. End quote. The last goal, to find a replacement, of course denies Anna's individuality in order to make her a kind of woman that will suit him. Right? So it starts off pining for Anna, and the solution is to find an Anna that he can be with instead. Any Anna will do. But what Gurov really wants is someone to share with him the world of intrigue he had developed with Anna. The secret no longer binds him to Anna. It only makes him feel lonely. He tries to talk to a friend whose reply focuses on the quality of the fish. Right? That's the fish comment. Right. And this leads Gurov to what appears to be an existential break from the idle life of the elite. Quote, what wasted evening, what tedious, empty days. Frantic card playing, gluttony, perpetual talk, always about the same thing. The greater part of one's time and energy went on business that was of no use to anyone and to discussing the same thing over and over again. Weren't we talking about the Java House just moments ago? Yeah. I don't know what brought that to mind. It appeared out of nowhere. Ex nihilo, in fact, suddenly emerged. And so while this is a great critique of his life, and it's true, right? His life is absolutely trivial and mundane and inauthentic. It's a great, honest critique of his life. But he frames his depression in terms of missing Anna, and not the dishonesty with which he exists. Because he feels Anna's absence is the problem, and not the way that he spends his days, visiting her becomes the solution. He tells his wife a lie and goes to her town, finds her house, and doesn't know how to contact her. Right? Finds her, doesn't know what to say, age 78, so he decides to go to the theater, does so, and sees Anna. Quote, when Gurov's glance fell on her, his heart seemed to stop, and he knew in a flash that the whole world contained no one nearer or dearer to him, no one more important to his happiness. This little woman, in no way remarkable, now filled his whole life, was his grief, his joy, all he desired. End quote. Now, this sounds like a description of love, but remember, it's unreality. They've now talked for several months after a brief affair in summer vacation. He wasn't good to her during the affair, and is only using her afterward as a way to avoid thinking of his own life. He's convinced himself that she's his whole world, for conveniently forgetting that he's had plenty of desires in the meantime. Remember all those other Annas that he's looking at and kind of fantasizing about? Suddenly they don't matter anymore. It's only his Anna, that pathetic little girl that he truly desires. Are you seeing the perils of self-deception? As Chekhov just kind of spotlights this one's in neon lights, another spotlight over here. All right, page 79. Anna is shocked by his presence. When they escape to a balcony, she confesses, I've been so unhappy. I could think of nothing but you the whole time. I lived on the thoughts of you. I tried to forget. Why? Oh, why did you come? End quote. We don't have as good of a sense of her inner life as we do Gurov, so it's difficult to know whether her response is more genuine than her earlier play acting. At the very least, her ambivalence regarding the memory of the affair seems accurate. She's unhappy, she lives on memories, and then she tries to forget them. Right? I'm unhappy. Oh, remember that great time? Let me forget those memories. Either because she wants to not be distracted from finding interest in her current life, or because she's too distracted by how awful those memories actually are. We're not sure. In any case, the affair has heightened her loneliness. Perhaps, like Gurov, she feels unable to speak about what's on her mind, which is alienating, and would continually refer back to the thoughts of Gurov. Anna sends him away, bidding him not to return, promising to see him in Moscow. The narrator adds that, quote, her eyes showed that she, in truth, was unhappy. So it's true. That's her eyes. She's crying. She's sad. The sadness is there. It's true. True sadness. Chapter 4. Are we ready to move on? Okay. The affair begins again. Page 80. Anna began visiting him in Moscow, which leads to more cases of deception and self-deception. The narrator puts it beautifully. Quote, every 2 or 3 months, she left the town of S, telling her husband that she was going to consult a specialist on female diseases. And her husband believed her and did not believe her. The stance, believing and not believing, is the stance of self-deception. One could say that Gurov and Anna both have the same feelings about each other. They believe and don't believe that they're in love. To really be in love would be way too dangerous, right? And so they both believe and don't believe it to the same extent, and they're a great couple that way, because they match in their level of deception and self-deception. It's a match made in ambivalence. So, Gurov has begun to find the relationship meaningful, if only because it allows him to believe that he has an inner life of some sort. Quote, he led a double life, one in public, full of conventional truth and conventional deception, exactly like the lives of his friends and acquaintances, and another which flowed in secret. And owing to some strange, possibly quite accidental chain of circumstances, everything that was important, interesting, essential, everything about which he was sincere and never deceived himself, everything that composed the kernel of his life went on in secret, while everything that was false in him, his work, his discussions, his wife, was on the surface. So, the relationship with Anna provides him with the sense that there's something true that anchors him outside of the realm of the everyday. He can even claim that he never deceived himself because it feels true. The relationship also allows him to have a superior interpretation of those around him. Quote, he began to judge others by himself, no longer believing what he saw, and always assuming that the real, the only interesting life of every individual goes on as under cover of night, secretly. Every individual existence revolves around mystery. Understanding this allows him to tell himself that he's less lonely. Everyone else is like him in participating in a secret and unsayable world in life. Appearances are always lies. Truths are always unknown. He's still lonely, but not alone in his loneliness, especially not when Anna visits, for then he can share that world that he otherwise guards. All right, so here's what Chekhov's developing. Gurov, if you remember, was critical of this world of work, cards, gossip, wife, all those things that are very publicly accessible. What Anna offers is something private and intimate. He's never had much of a private, intimate life before because he's never had a secret that he thought worth keeping. Anna becomes this private secret. And suddenly, because all of this he hates, like he despises all that, right? Suddenly, because he despises that, it gives him an excuse to treasure this. It's like, oh, if all the surface things are false feeling, I bet this thing is true feeling. I must really love Anna because she's that private secret that I keep safe, and everything I make public is boring. So my real, true, private self is Anna. My open, public, false self, that's not Gurov. Gurov's right here. And it makes sense, right? And he uses that as a hermeneutic tool to start interpreting everybody else, right? So everybody else in the world around him, he sees their public self, and when he's nauseated by their public self, he suspects, oh, their real self are these hidden mysteries that nobody will ever know. Very, very convenient. Questions about that? Zach?
My question at this point is, at this point, Gurov establishes that he's had many past affairs,
Mhm.
but what is it specifically about Anna that engenders this level of obsession? Compared to some of the affairs he's had in the past, which seem to have been meaningless to him. At least based on the way that he describes them.
Right. I think what happens is that he's suddenly bored with the public life,
Mhm.
and that like chase after the new and the fleeting and the ephemeral that used to start his cycles over again. He's kind of bored of that, and the only alternative to that is his most recent adventure, which is Anna. You know, like he says he can't forget her. He's looking for other Annas, so clearly it must be true love. That's it. You know, maybe he's gotten older, maybe he wants to settle down-ish, maybe he realizes he can't quite snare the 20-somethings anymore, he doesn't like the 50-somethings, you know, so best stay with Anna. She's the last young that he'll get, you know.
How old is he?
I don't know, 40s.
He's just before 40.
Yeah.
So they're about the same age.
She's pictured as younger.
Right, but wasn't there someplace that referred to her being in her 40s? Or is that my?
I don't think the wife's older. The wife's in the 40s and
no,
looks
that's
60.
Right, that's right.
But Anna is
I
young and naive, right? I mean, this is the first time she's ever borne witness to that secret aim of men, right? She's naive. She's young. She's not in her 40s, probably. Not most 40s. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
But why do we not want him to love her?
I am not opposed to him loving her. I just like this narrator who's so snarky and so dismissive of any possibility of Gurov having an honest feeling. He is not an honest person. And that's the perils of self-deception, right? He's so successful at deceiving himself, he wouldn't know love if it actually occurred. Right? He's so twisted and convoluted in his own aims and ambitions and intentions, he'll never find the truth. Never. Because of things like that, right? I mean, he just continually doesn't respect her and then idealizes her, right? Eating his watermelon, like, oh yeah, sure, I respect you.
Maybe he didn't love her at that point,
Mm-hmm.
but
it transitions. You want it to be a love story?
I do at the end.
Okay.
I do at the end.
Okay. We'll
I
see.
didn't, I think it was maybe the last page of the story.
Uh-huh.
He himself admits, I had to live this old
Mm-hmm.
to know love.
Mm-hmm. Well, can we see when we get there? Well, we're on the self-deception train right now. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. We'll see how the last page emerges. Zach.
Oh, I'll comment later.
Okay.
Once we get to that point.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Page 81. Anna visits. They kiss. He asks, "What's new?" And quote, "She could not speak because she was crying." Gurov decides to wait till she's had her cry out. He rang for tea, and a little later, while he was drinking it, she was still standing there, her face to the window. Well, at least he's had his tea. The narrator describes the tears. Quote, "She wept from emotion, from her bitter consciousness of the sadness of their life. They could only see one another in secret, hiding from people as if they were thieves. Was not their life a broken one?" "Don't cry," he said. There's not much pity, but here's his thinking. Quote, "It was quite obvious to him that this love of theirs would not soon come to an end, and that no one could say when this end would be. Anna loved him ever more fondly, worshipped him, and there would have been no point in telling her that one day it must end. Indeed, she would not have believed him." Right? So Gurov's knows, the clock's running out on this. It'll come to an end, but we don't need to tell her that because then she'll just cry more. Just let the girl believe that it's forever. That's okay. That's the loving thing to do, right? Let's just let her think it's forever. I know the clock's running out, but let's let her have that hope. That's fine. He still thinks of her as hopelessly in love with him. It's probably a biased opinion. Maybe. He's Gurov after all. Kind of the hot stuff of Yalta. Of course she's in love with him. But as he reaches out to her, he catches sight of himself in the looking glass, prompting a moment of reflection. See what I did there? He's in the looking glass. He's reflecting. See that?
Mhm.
His hair is already beginning to turn gray. Why did she love him so? Women had always believed him different from what he really was, had loved in him not himself, but the man their imagination pictured him, a man they had sought for eagerly all their lives. And afterwards, when they discovered their mistake, they went on loving him just the same. And not one of them had ever been happy with him. Time had passed, he had met one woman after the other, but had never loved. There had been all sorts of things between them, but never love. Right? And so there's something that Gurov finds. And again, I suspect Gurov has a slightly inflated self-reputation, maybe. But what he thinks is that, with his George Clooney cheekbones, which you can see very clearly drawn, and a bold chin, also clearly drawn, Gurov is a man of one's dreams. But what they love in him is not Gurov, it's the imaginary Gurov, right? So they love in him something more like the super Gurov that they think is there, and when they find out that it isn't there, they're not disappointed, they still love it, right? So he has this allure of super Gurov, and the revelation of ordinary Gurov is fine, right? That's okay. You're ordinary Gurov, you're okay. Does that make sense? And it's odd to him. It perplexes him why they would be disappointed in ordinary Gurov when what they really seem to crave was super Gurov, which he isn't, but pretends to be, but is not. Right? So he gives them the Gurov show, they like the show, but they stay for the after show. And he's like, that's weird. It never crosses his mind that love might exist after the show. Right? He might have a huge ego, he has no self-esteem whatsoever. He doesn't actually value himself. He doesn't value the selves of those he loves, in the Spring Break Yalta sense of loves, right? He doesn't. And to that extent, I think it's, again, the narrator pushing against an interpretation where he really loves her. That's just me. We'll keep going. So he credits women with loving him, but realizes as he reflects that he's still alone. The person he had allowed women to believe was him, someone lovable, isn't the person he ever saw himself as being. His affairs never helped him to unlearn his loneliness because he lacked the self-honesty required to be honest with another. Does that make sense? Okay. Chekhov ends with Gurov's musing. Quote, he and Anna loved one another as people who are very close and intimate, as husband and wife, as dear friends love one another. It seemed to them that fate had intended them for one another, and they couldn't figure out why they were married to others. They were like two migrating birds in separate cages. They forgave one another of all that they were ashamed of in the past, in their present, and felt that this love of theirs had changed them both. Something has changed in Gurov. Chekhov allows this. Quote, formerly, he had consoled himself by the first argument that came into his head, but now arguments were nothing to him. He felt profound pity, desired to be sincere, tender. This, at last, seems to be a genuine moment and perhaps the beginning of love. They talk about the situation, about how to avoid the deception that plagues them, and Chekhov ends with an ending that's beautifully ambiguous. Quote, it seemed to them that they were within an inch of arriving at a decision and that then a new beautiful life would begin. And they both realized that the end was still far, far away and that the hardest, the most complicated part was just beginning. The trouble is that at least Gurov's love has been inspired by keeping truth secret, by having an inner life that nobody knew. To come out into the open, to divorce scandals aside, would mean having only a single life, which would risk having him enter in the same spiral that he'd been in already, right? Once Anna stops being private Anna and starts being surface Anna, what do you think will happen? Will they still be blissfully enamored with each other?
Well, the problem is that she can't stand being private Anna. If she had this same weird worldview where she liked the privacy and the secrecy, that would be something.
Well, here's what Anna likes. Anna likes being the fallen, scandalous woman. She likes the impossibility of, she doesn't like private Anna, she likes the impossibility of public Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what's feeling the relationship for her. She loves its impossibility, but its potentiality. It'll never happen, but it could happen, right? Whereas Gurov loves keeping it this way. She tells herself that it'd be better, but she only tells herself that by virtue of the impossible, which guarantees it will never happen. This is what she's in love with, because it makes it idealizable, not real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, it's difficult to say what, beyond his moment of pity, could possibly even be genuine for Gurov, just as it's impossible to know how much of Anna's emotions are learned performance. It's hard to know what they do and don't know about themselves or each other. Does that make sense? So here's the implications. There are 3. Number 1, Chekhov does an excellent job of showing the little ways that we lie to ourselves, how we put ourselves into situations that we then determine as fate, how we play roles that we learn in culture, how we allow ourselves to repeat patterns without noticing that that's what we're doing. He also shows an inability to love honestly that keeps us trapped in lonely lives, even if these are lives of shared loneliness. Did you get that? Excellent. Number 2. The story shows how our loneliness is perpetuated by mass culture. Not only trips to Yalta, which become lonely and boring, in the right kind of way, not the wrong kind of way. It's very droll to be in Yalta, of course. But also the world of newspapers and conversations and cards and coworkers. There's something that's empty about all of our interactions with the crowd, and something about this level of living that pushes us toward finding intimacy, finding someone that we can truly share our whole being with, and thereby unlearning our loneliness. Right? I mean, the superficiality that Gurov despises is despicable. Right? I mean, there's no intimacy, there's no truth in that kind of gossipy, surface level mingling, right? It's the talk of the day world that Heidegger talks about. It's empty blather. And swimming around in that, of course, makes you thirsty for something deep and nourishing and true and real, right? I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? It's lonely up here because there's nothing real. Come back down. Find something real. It's down there. You just have to stop swimming up here. Number 3. Chekhov also indicates, along with Wallace, the way that compassion seems to be the entrance into love. One way to understand the ending, of course, is that, quote, the hardest, most complicated part involves truly loving the other on a daily basis instead of fantasizing about the other from afar, which they do really well. It's easy for Gurov to maintain a worshipable demeanor from afar, and easy for him to idealize someone that he sees only once every few months. How long can it last if they're actually seeing each other day after day after day? If there is to become a happy ending, it will require that Gurov maintain his compassion and live an empty, broken life, and that he finds that Anna is able to love the person that he eventually finds himself to be. The promise of the story, the ray of hope, perhaps, is that even a false love might transform into something real, at least eventually. And Chekhov puts that really faint ray of hope at the very end, but given everything else in the story, it seems just kind of like a bitter hoax. Like, sure, there's that ray of hope. Might as well call it fate and make it a nice, nifty story. Zach, question?
It's related to an earlier part in the story.
Okay.
So there's this point where it's very clear that Gurov is not satisfied with his mundane existence, and it talks about how even though he's a baker, he hangs out with many people who are, according to his societal conception of his reality, on an elevated level. He hangs out with all these actors and musicians. I was just wondering, what is the origin of his impulse to describe his affair with Anna to these people? Like, whenever he's hanging out with these people that are of an exalted status, he has this primal urge to tell them about Anna.
Well, because that to him it's kind of like political capital, right? If you were to tell them about Anna, if you played the Anna card, then of course all these actors and musicians and hip people would be like, oh yeah, we know the affair. You're in our club, Gurov. Come on, you've done it well. But to actually disclose it would effectively prohibit him from joining that club, right? So he can say that, oh, I live the bohemian life just like all these actors and musicians, right? Of course they have the rock star life. I am like them. I am winning the way Charlie Sheen is winning. I do it all the time, right? And he can tell himself that as long as he doesn't actually disclose that that's what he's doing. Because once he told the actors, like, hey, guess what? I have an affair with this lady with the dog named Anna. She's hot. I don't think it quite give him the capital that he wants to think that it would. But as long as he keeps it at the level of thinking that it would instead of actually trying it, it's beautiful because it makes him feel like he's one of them, even though.
So he's seeking some kind of validation.
Yeah.
And he's being utterly denied.
Well, no, it's self-deception, right? He tells himself that he's not being denied because he doesn't actually seek the validation. He tells himself that who he is validated by the very fact that his idealized version of who they are would validate them if they knew. And that keeps him from actually ever having to work that all out because he's already done it in his head, right?
It's a lot like the dentist in that way, where or is it more like the dentist or the sister? No, it's more like the dentist, where she creates a fantasy, and as long as she doesn't pursue the fantasy,
it's safe. It's
Yeah.
real. Yeah. Yeah.
So that explains why he's so furious on the single occasion when he does divulge this information to somebody who he values, and he gives him this very innocuous comment about fish, and he's infuriated.
He's like, I just showed my private self, and you're talking fish? That's my private self. You can't talk about fish. No, that's repugnant. Yeah, well, there you go, Gurov. Yeah, that's exactly why. Other questions?
the idea that someone should not be interested in your own affair.
Oh, it's terrible.
Now, going back to his question, I mean, if he really was going down the road of love, wouldn't it be reasonable to think that he would want to share that joy with someone?
Bring it to surface, Anna. Right?
If it was Anna that he loved and not the secrecy of the whole thing.
Right.
You know, but he's not wanting to share. He's wanting to kind of edge up his game, right? He's not like, oh, here's Anna. Look, I gotta unburden my soul of this secret. It's more like, hey, I'm part of your group. Check this out. I'm having an affair too, right? I'm just like you, me and you, right? No. He tells one person, and then or he insinuates to one person. It doesn't go well. He's like, shh, forget that. I'll keep it a secret. And he's not bursting. He's not yearning to tell everybody the joyous news of love. He's like, no, got to keep it like a secret.
Well, and he did have to keep it a secret, and that's why I would assume he wouldn't go further than one person.
Well, I mean, but if they divorced, if they brought themselves into the open, secret no more. They could actually be together.
And why did they worry about being seen there? Who was to know either of them?
It was
You know.
It was the thrill of possible discovery. It made it feel all that much more scandalous, and thus more like what the ritzy people do. They have scandals. We're having a scandal too. Check this out. Somebody could see us. Anybody care? No, it's y'all. Nobody cares. Everybody does it. Nobody cares. Zach?
There's also never a point in the entire story where he divulges a piece of personal information about himself to Anna. Like, it's the most concealed, guarded variety of intimacy you could possibly have, and yet he claims to love her.
Yeah.
But that's characteristic of men.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, not all
I think there are a couple of bleeding hearts in this very room. Just a suspicion. I don't know.
You may not know this about me.
But
let me divulge it all in public right now. I will gush forth all of my inner truth.
And
Is anything to
conversely-
be taken by the fact that I think she was dressed in white and had a white dog?
Is what, conversely?
Yeah.
What was the first part?
Is there anything
That was what I said.
to be taken by the color that she was white, which is snow? And
Yeah, it's pure. I mean, she starts out pure. It's overdetermined. I mean, it's quite lovely and beautiful. She's young. Her limbs are tanned by being in the sun. The white accents the tan limbs lovely. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can look into that, definitely. I mean, I'm sure you can do the purity rate, but it just seems like Chekhov's so overdetermined everything in this story. But he does it so baldly, like the half-hour watermelon slice. I mean, that's such a delicious little detail. To give Gurov a half hour to eat. It's not like he's just kind of snacking on it. He takes a half hour to eat his slice of watermelon before saying, "Why wouldn't I respect you?"
He's been thinking.
No, he's just having his watermelon slice.
I like
He's a slow
imagined it.
thinker.
I imagined him eating the entire watermelon.
No, it's just a slice. He cuts himself a slice like, wow, good watermelon.
Does he
You
eat
know,
the
like,
rind too?
he just cuts off a little bit more, the way the ritzy people do it, snack.
It was just a good.
And a half hour later, why wouldn't I respect you?
Well, he's a predator, but was she in the Alta was she trolling?
Of course.
She
That's
was.
what people go to Yalta for. Nobody really goes to Yalta to do that, but everybody's in Yalta to do that.
Okay.
I mean, it's one of those, they tell themselves that that's not what anybody does there in order to themselves be able to do it without telling themselves that that's what they're doing.
But they knew that that's what people do there.
Yeah, but they don't really do that, except for the ones that do, like me, but that doesn't actually ever really happen except all the time.
Well, I'd love to see this on the stage. I would just love to see how the director would handle these two.
Yeah, the characters are great. The narrator, I think, though, is even greater.
Yeah.
Because the narrator, and that's one thing that escapes cinema and theater, is you don't really get usually a good sense of narrator. And here, the narrator, I mean, the characters are really flat in a lot of, I mean, they're really boring characters. But the narrator is awesome. So, anything else?
No.
Good class?
Good
Very
class.
good.
Business class.
Very